31. Greatly as Anna had desired to see her son, and long as she had thought of and prepared herself for the interview, she had not at all expected that it would affect her so powerfully. On returning to her lonely suite in the hotel, she could not for a long time understand why she was there. Yes, it is all ended, and I am alone again, she said to herself, and without taking off her bonnet, she sat down in an easy-chair by the fireplace. With her eyes fixed on a bronze clock, standing on a table between the windows, she began pondering. The French maid, whom she had brought from abroad, came and asked whether she would not dress. She looked at her in astonishment and replied, "Later." A waiter offered her coffee. "Later," she said. The Italian nurse, having smartened up the baby girl, came in and held her out to Anna. The plump, well-nourished baby, as usual when she saw her mother, turned her little hands, so fat that they looked as if the wrists had threads tied tightly around them, palms downward, and, smiling with a toothless mouth, began waving them as a fish moves its fins, making the starched folds of her embroidered frock rustle. It was impossible not to smile, not to kiss the little thing, impossible not to hold out a finger to her, which she caught, screaming and wriggling the whole surface of her little body. Impossible not to approach one's lips to her mouth and let her draw them in, her way of kissing. And Anna did all these things. She took her in her arms, dandled her, and kissed her fresh cheek and bare elbows. But at the sight of this child, she realized still more clearly that what she felt for her could not even be called love in comparison with her feeling for Sereja. Everything about this baby was sweet, but for some reason she did not grip the heart. Upon the first child, though by an unloved man, all Anna's unsatisfied capacity for loving was lavished. But the girl was born on the most trying conditions, and had not received 100th part of the care given to the first child. Besides, everything about the baby was still prospective, while Sereja was already an individual and a beloved one. Thoughts and feelings struggling in his mind, he understood and loved and judged her, she thought, recalling his words and looks. And from him she was forever sundered, not only physically, but spiritually, and there was no remedy for it. She returned the baby to its nurse, sent them away, and opened a locket with Sereja's portrait as a baby, about the same age as the little girl. Rising, she removed her bonnet and took from the table an album in which were photographs of her son at different ages. She wanted to compare these likenesses, and began drawing them out of the album. She took them all out but one, the last and best of the photographs. He was there in a white shirt, astride a chair, his brows frowning while his mouth smiled. This was his most characteristic and best expression. She caught hold of a corner of this photo several times with her deft little hand, the slender white fingers of which moved with special strenuousness that day, but each time they slipped, and she could not get the picture out. There was no knife on the table, and she drew out the photo next to it. One, taken in Rome, of Vronsky with long hair and wearing a round hat, and with it pushed out her son's photo. "Yes, there he is," she said with a glance at Vronsky's likeness, and suddenly remembered that he was the cause of her present grief. She had not called him to mind all that morning, but now, having caught sight of that manly, noble face, so familiar and dear to her, she felt an unexpected flow of love toward him. "But where is he? How can he leave me alone in my anguish?" she suddenly thought with a sense of reproach, forgetting that she herself had hidden from him all that concerned her son. She sent to ask him to come up to her at once. She awaited him, thinking with a sinking heart of the words in which he would tell him everything, and of the expressions of his love which would comfort her. The servant returned with the reply that he had a visitor, but would come up at once, and wished to know whether he might bring with him Prince Yashvin, who had just arrived in Petersburg. So he won't come alone, she thought. He won't come so that I can tell him everything, but will bring Yashvin. And suddenly a strange idea crossed her mind. What if he had ceased to love her? Going over in her mind the events of the last few days, she thought she perceived in everything a confirmation of that dreadful thought, in the fact that he had not dined at home the day before, and that he had insisted on having separate apartments while in Petersburg, and that even now he was not coming alone, perhaps to avoid a tête-à-tête with her. But he must tell me. I must know it. If I know it, then I know what I shall do, she told herself, powerless to imagine the position she would find herself in when she was convinced of his indifference. She imagined that he had ceased to love her, and she was almost in despair, which roused in her a feeling of peculiar excitement. She rang for her maid, and going into the dressing-room, paid more attention to her toilet than she had done all these days, as if, having ceased to love her, his love might be recalled by her wearing the dress and having her hair done in the style most becoming to her. She heard the bell before she was ready. When she entered the drawing-room, not his eyes, but Yashvin's met hers. Vronsky was examining her son's photos, which she had forgotten on the table, and did not hurry to look at her. "We are acquainted," she said, placing her little hand in the enormous hand of the embarrassed Yashvin, whose confusion did not seem to accord with his huge figure and rough face. "We've been acquainted since last year's races." "Let me have them," she added, with a rapid movement, taking from Vronsky the photos he was looking at, and glancing at him impressively with glistening eyes. "Were the races good this year? I saw the races on the Corso in Rome instead. But of course you don't care for life abroad," she went on with a pleasant smile. "I know you and all your tastes, though we've met so seldom." "I'm very sorry to hear it, for my tastes are mostly bad," said Yashvin, biting the left side of his moustache. After a short talk, noticing that Vronsky looked at the clock, Yashvin asked whether she would be staying long in Petersburg, and straightening his immense body, picked up his cap. "Not long, I think," she replied with embarrassment, glancing at Vronsky. "Then we shall not meet again?" said Yashvin, rising. And then turning to Vronsky, he asked, "Where are you dining?" "Come and dine with me," said Anna resolutely, as if vexed with herself for her embarrassment, yet blushing as she always did when she revealed her position to a fresh person. "The dinners here are not good, but at any rate you will see one another. Of all his regimental friends, Alexis liked you best." "I shall be very pleased," said Yashvin, with a smile which showed Vronsky that he liked Anna very much. Yashvin bowed and went out. Vronsky remained behind. "You are going too?" she asked. "I am late as it is," he answered. "Go on, I shall catch you up in a minute," he shouted to Yashvin. She took his hand and looked fixedly at him, trying to think of something to say to prevent his leaving her. "Wait, I have something to tell you," she said, and raising his short hand, she pressed it to her neck. "Was it wrong of me to ask him to dinner?" "You've done very well," he replied, showing his compact row of teeth in a calm smile, and kissing her hand. "Alexis, you have not changed toward me?" she asked, squeezing his hand in both hers. "Alexis, I'm in torment here. When are we going?" "Soon, very soon. You would hardly believe how trying our life here is to me too," he said, drawing away his hand. "Well, then go. Go," she said in an offended tone, and quickly left him. 32. When Vronsky returned, Anna had not yet come home. He was told that, soon after he left, a lady came to see her, and they went away together. Her departure without mentioning where she was going, her prolonged absence, and the fact that she had been away somewhere in the morning without telling him about it, added to her strangely excited look that morning, and the animosity with which in Yashvin's presence she had almost snatched her son's photographs out of his hand, made Vronsky reflect. He decided that it was necessary to have an explanation with her, and he waited for her in the drawing-room. But Anna did not return alone. She brought with her old maid and aunt, Princess Oblonskaya. She it was who had been to see Anna that morning, and they had been shopping together. Anna seemed not to notice the worried look of inquiry on Vronsky's face, but chattered gaily about what she had been buying. He saw that something unusual was taking place within her. Her eyes glittered with an expression of strained attention when her look rested on him, and in her speech and motions there was that nervous quickness and grace which, during the first period of their intimacy, had so captivated him, but which now troubled and alarmed him. The table was laid for 4. They were all assembled and about to enter the little dining room, when Tushkevich arrived with a message for Anna from the Princess Betsy. The princess asked to be excused for not coming to say goodbye. She was not well, but asked Anna to come and see her between 6:30 and 9. Vronsky glanced at Anna when that definite time was mentioned, which showed that care had been taken to prevent her meeting anyone there. But Anna did not seem to observe it. "I'm sorry that between 6:30 and 9 is just the time when I cannot come," she replied with a faint smile. "The princess will be very sorry." "And I too." "I expect you are going to hear Patty?" asked Tushkevich. "Patty? That's an idea. I would go if I could get a box." "I could get you one," said Tushkevich. "I should be very, very grateful if you would," replied Anna. "But won't you stay and dine with us?" Vronsky slightly shrugged his shoulders. He couldn't in the least understand what Anna was after. Why had she brought the old princess? Why had she asked Tushkevich to stay to dinner? And, strangest of all, why was she sending him to get her a box for the opera? Was it conceivable that, in her position, she was going to the opera when Patty was to sing, and when all the subscribers, her society acquaintances, would be present? He looked seriously at her, but she answered him with the same provocative glance of high spirits or desperation, the meaning of which he could not make out. At dinner, Anna was aggressively merry, seeming to flirt with both Tushkevich and Yashvin. After dinner, Tushkevich went to get a box and Yashvin to have a smoke. Vronsky went with Yashvin down to his own rooms, but after sitting with him a while, ran upstairs again. Anna was already dressed in a light silk dress, cut low in front and trimmed with velvet, a dress she had had made in Paris. And on her head she wore some rich white lace, which outlined her face and set off her brilliant beauty to great advantage. "You're really going to the theatre?" said he, trying not to look at her. "Why do you ask in such a frightened way?" she said, again offended because he did not look at her. "Why should I not go?" She appeared not to grasp the meaning of her words. "Of course, there's no reason whatever," he replied with a frown. "That's just what I say," she answered, purposely ignoring the sarcasm of his tone and calmly pulling up her long perfumed glove. "Anna, for heaven's sake, what has come to you?" he said, trying to recall her to senses, as her husband once used to do. "I don't understand your question." "You know it is out of the question for you to go." "Why? I'm not going alone. The Princess Barbara has gone to dress and is coming with me." He shrugged his shoulders with a bewildered and despairing look. "But don't you know?" he began. "I don't want to know," she almost screamed. "I don't. Do I repent of what I've done? No, no, no. If it had to begin again from the beginning, I should do just the same. For us, for you and me, only one thing is important, whether we love each other. No other considerations exist. Why do we live here, separated, and not seeing one another? Why can't I go? I love you, and it's all the same to me," she said, changing from French into Russian, while her eyes, as she looked at him, glittered with a light he could not understand. "So long as you have not changed toward me. Why don't you look at me?" He looked at her. He saw all the beauty of her face and of her dress, which suited her as her dresses always did. But now it was just this beauty and elegance that irritated him. "My feelings cannot change, you know that. But I beg you not to go. I entreat you," he said, again speaking French with tender entreaty in his voice, but with a cold look in his eyes. She did not hear his words, but saw the coldness of his look, and replied irritably, "And I beg you will explain why I should not go." "Because it might cause you—" He became confused. "I don't understand you at all. Yashvin's society is not compromising, and Princess Barbara is no worse than other people. Ah, here she is." 33. Vronsky for the first time felt vexed and almost angry with Anna for her unwillingness to realize her position. This feeling was strengthened by the fact that he could not tell her the reason of his vexation. Had he told her frankly what he thought, he could have said, "To appear dressed as you are at the theatre accompanied by the princess, whom everybody knows, means not only to acknowledge your position as a fallen woman, but to throw down a challenge to society, which means to renounce it forever. But he could not say this to her. But how can she fail to understand it? And what is happening to her? He asked himself. He felt that his regard for her had diminished, and his consciousness of her beauty increased simultaneously. He went down frowning to his rooms, and taking a seat beside Yashvin, who sat with his long legs stretched out on a chair drinking brandy and seltzer, ordered the same for himself. "You were talking about Lankovsky's powerful. He's a good horse, and I advise you to buy him," said Yashvin, glancing at his comrade's gloomy countenance. "It's true he has a goose rump, but his legs and head leave nothing to be desired." "I think I'll take him," replied Vronsky. This conversation about horses interested him, but he never forgot Anna, and involuntarily listened to the steps in the corridor, and glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece. "Anna Arkadyevna sent me to say that she has gone to the theatre," said a servant. Yashvin emptied another glass of brandy into the sparkling water, drank it, and then rose, buttoning his coat. "Well, let us go," he said, smiling slightly under cover of his big moustache, and showing by that smile that he understood the cause of Vronsky's depression, but did not attach importance to it. "I'm not going," said Vronsky dismally. "Well, I have to go, I promised. Then au revoir. But why not come to the stalls? Take Krasinski's place," Yashvin added as he went out. "No, I have something to do." With a wife one has trouble, but with one who is not a wife, it's worse, thought Yashvin as he left the hotel. Left alone, Vronsky got up and began pacing the room. What is on today? The 4th abonnement. Alexander will be there with his wife, and probably mother also. That's to say, all Petersburg will be there. Now she's gone in, taken off her cloak, and come forward into the light. Tushkevich, Yashvin, the Princess Barbara. He pictured them to himself. And what of me? Am I afraid, or have I put her under Tushkevich's protection? Whichever way one looks at it, it's a stupid position. Why does she put me in such a position? He said with a wave of his arm. As he made this gesture, he struck the little table on which the seltzer and a decanter of brandy were standing, and almost knocked it over. In trying to save it from falling, he overturned it, and in his vexation kicked it and rang the bell. "If you wish to remain in my service," he said to the valet when the latter came in, "remember your duties. There must be none of this sort of thing. You must clear it away." The valet, conscious that he was not to blame, was about to defend himself, but, glancing at his master, saw by his face that there was nothing for it but to keep silence. So, stooping quickly, he knelt on the carpet and began sorting out the whole and broken glasses and bottles. "That's not your business. Send a waiter to clear it up, and get out my dress suit." Vronsky entered the theatre at 8:30. The performance was in full swing. The attendant, an old man, helped him off with his overcoat, recognized him, and, addressing him as "Your Excellency," suggested that he need not take a ticket for his coat, but should merely call for Theodore when he wanted it. There was nobody in the brightly illuminated corridor except the attendant and 2 footmen, who, with their master's coat over their arms, stood listening outside a door. Through a door slightly ajar came the sounds of a muffled staccato accompaniment by the orchestra and of a female voice rendering a musical phrase with precision. The door opened to let an attendant slip through, and the nearly completed phrase struck Vronsky's ears distinctly. The door was closed immediately, and he did not hear the end of the phrase, nor the trill after it, but knew from the thunder of applause behind the door that the trill was finished. When he entered the auditorium, brilliantly illuminated by chandeliers and bronze gas brackets, the noise still continued. On the stage, the singer, in a glitter of bare shoulders and diamonds, was bowing low and smiling as she picked up, with the help of the tenor, who held her hand, bouquets that had been clumsily flung across the footlights. She went up to a gentleman, with hair shiny with pomatum and parted in the middle, who was stretching his long arms across the footlights to hand her something, and the whole audience in the stalls and in the boxes stirred, leaned forward, shouted, and applauded. The conductor from his raised seat helped to pass the bouquets and rearranged his white tie. Vronsky went to the middle of the floor, then stopped and looked around him. Today he paid less attention than ever to the familiar surroundings, the stage, the noise, and all that well-known, uninteresting motley herd of audience in the packed theatre. In the boxes sat the same kind of ladies, with the same kind of officers behind them as usual. The same kind of people, heaven only knew who. The same gaily dressed women, uniforms, frock coats. The same dirty crowd in the gallery. And in the whole of that throng, in the boxes and front seats, some 40 real men and women. To these oases, Vronsky at once turned his attention, and immediately got into touch with them. The act had just finished when he came in, so before going to his brother's box, he went up to the front row and paused beside Serpukhowskoy, who was standing with his knee bent, tapping the wall of the orchestra with his heel. He had noticed Vronsky afar off and welcomed him with a smile. Vronsky had not yet seen Anna. He intentionally avoided looking her way, but from the direction in which people were looking, he knew where she was. He glanced around unobtrusively, but did not look at her. Prepared for the worst, he looked for Karenina. Luckily for him, Karenina was not in the theatre that evening. "How little of the military man is left in you," remarked Serpukhowskoy. "You might be a diplomatist, an artist, or anything of that kind." "Yes, as soon as I returned home I put on a black coat," Vronsky replied with a smile, slowly taking out his opera glasses. "Now in that, I confess, I envy you. I, when I come back from abroad and put this on again, regret my freedom," he said, touching his shoulder knot. Serpukhowskoy had long ago ceased to trouble himself about Vronsky's career, but was as fond of him as ever, and was particularly amiable to him now. "A pity you were late for the first act." Vronsky, listening with one ear, levelled his glasses first at the lower tier, and then at the boxes in the dress circle, taking them all in review. Next to a lady wearing a turban, and a bald old man who blinked angrily just as Vronsky's moving glass reached him, he suddenly saw Anna's proud head, strikingly beautiful and smiling in its frame of lace. She was in the 5th box in the lower tier, some 20 paces from him. She sat in the front of the box and, slightly turning back, was saying something to Yashvin. The poise of her head on her fine broad shoulders, and the gleam of restrained excitement in her eyes and her whole face, reminded him precisely of how he had seen her at the ball in Moscow. But her beauty affected him very differently now. There was no longer anything mysterious in his feelings for her, and therefore, though her beauty attracted him even more strongly, it also offended him. She was not looking his way, but he felt that she had already seen him. When Vronsky directed his glasses that way again, he noticed that the Princess Barbara was very red, and that she was laughing unnaturally and looking round incessantly at the next box, while Anna, tapping with her closed fan the red velvet edge of the box, was gazing fixedly, somewhere else, not seeing, and evidently not wishing to see, what was taking place in the next box. Yashvin's face wore the expression it had when he was losing at cards. He was frowning and drawing the left side of his moustache further and further into his mouth, looking askance at the adjoining box. In that box to the left were the Kartazovs. Vronsky knew them, and knew that Anna had been acquainted with them. The wife, a thin little woman, was standing up in her box with her back to Anna, putting on an opera cloak which her husband was holding for her. Her face looked pale and angry, and she was speaking excitedly. Kartazov, a stout bald-headed man, kept glancing round at Anna while trying to pacify his wife. When the wife left the box, the husband loitered behind, trying to catch Anna's eye and evidently wishing to bow to her. But Anna, with obvious intention, took no notice of him, and, turning round, was saying something to Yashvin, whose cropped head was bent toward her. Kartazov went out without bowing, and the box remained empty. Vronsky could not make out what had taken place between the Kartazovs and Anna, but he saw that it was something humiliating for Anna. He realized that from what he had seen, and especially from Anna's face, who, he knew, was summoning her utmost strength to sustain the role she had undertaken. She fully succeeded in playing that role, of external tranquillity. Those who did not know her and her set, and heard none of the expressions of pity, indignation, or surprise uttered by the women because she had allowed herself to appear in public, and to show herself so ostentatiously in her lace headdress, and in all her beauty, admired the composure and loveliness of the woman, and did not suspect that she felt as though pilloried. Knowing that something had happened, but not knowing just what, Vronsky felt painfully agitated, and, hoping to find out something, set out for his brother's box. Intentionally leaving the auditorium at the opposite side to where Anna was, he encountered the commander of his old regiment, who stood talking to two acquaintances. Vronsky heard them mention the name of Karenina, and noticed how the commander hastened to call him loudly by name, with a significant glance at the others. "Ah, Vronsky, when are you coming to see us at the regiment? We can't let you go away without a feast. You're one of our very own," said the commander. "I shall not have time. I'm very sorry. Some other time," said Vronsky, and ran up the stairs to his brother's box. In the box was Vronsky's mother, the old countess, with her iron-grey curls. Varya and the Princess Sorokina he met in the corridor outside. Having conducted the Princess Sorokina back to Vronsky's mother, Varya held out her hand to her brother-in-law, and at once began to talk of the matter that interested him. He had rarely seen her so excited. "I consider it mean and disgusting, and Madame Kartazova had no right to do it. Madame Karenina," she began. "But what is it? I don't know." "Haven't you heard?" "You know I shall be the last to hear of it. Is there a creature more venomous than that Kartazova? But what has she done?" "My husband told me. She insulted Madame Karenina. Her husband began conversing with her from his box, and Kartazova flew at him. It seems she said something insulting out loud, and then went out." "Count, your mamma wants you," said the Princess Sorokina, looking out of the box door. "I've been expecting you all the time," said his mother with a sarcastic smile. "I never see anything of you." Her son saw that she could not repress a smile of satisfaction. "Good evening, mamma. I was coming to you," he replied coldly. "Why don't you go pay court to Madame Karenina?" she added, when the Princess Sorokina had stepped aside. "She's making a sensation. They're forgetting Paddy because of her." "Mamma, I ask you not to speak to me about that subject," he answered, frowning. "I'm saying what everyone says." Vronsky did not reply, and after a few words addressed to the Princess Sorokina, he left the box. In the doorway, he met his brother. "Ah, Alexis," said his brother. "What a shame. That woman is a fool, that's all. I was just going to see her. Let's go together." Vronsky did not listen to him. He hurried downstairs, feeling that he must do something, he knew not what. He was disturbed, both by vexation with Anna for placing herself and him in this false position, and by pity for her sufferings. He descended to the stalls and went straight to Anna's box, in front of which stood Streamov talking to her. "There are no more tenors. The mould for them is smashed." Vronsky bowed to her and stopped to shake hands with Streamov. "I think you got here late and missed the finest aria," said Anna to him, with a mocking glance as it seemed to him. "I'm a poor judge," he replied, looking severely at her. "Like Prince Yashvin, who considers that Paddy sings too loud," she returned with a smile. "Thank you," she said, taking with her small gloved hand a program Vronsky had picked up for her. And suddenly at that instant, her beautiful face quivered. She rose and went to the back of the box. Noticing that during the next act her box remained empty, Vronsky left the theatre amid cries of "hush" from the audience, which had become quiet to listen to Cavatina. He went to his hotel. Anna had already returned. When Vronsky entered, she was still dressed as she had been at the theatre. She was sitting in the first armchair by the wall, fixedly gazing before her. She glanced at him and immediately resumed her former posture. "Anna," he said. "It's all your fault. Your fault," she exclaimed with tears of despair and spite in her voice, and rose. "But I asked, I entreated you not to go. I knew it would be unpleasant for you." "Unpleasant!" she cried. It was awful. However long I might live, I shall never forget it. She said it was a disgrace to sit near me. The words of a silly woman, he said. But why risk it? Why provoke? I hate your calmness. You should not have driven me to it. If you loved me... Anna, is it a question of my love? Yes, if you loved me as I love you, if you suffer the anguish I do, she replied with a frightened glance at him. He was sorry for her and yet vexed with her. He assured her of his love, because he saw that that alone could pacify her now, and did not reproach her with words, though he reproached her in his heart. And those assurances of love, which to him appeared so trivial that he felt ashamed to utter them, she drank in, and gradually became calm. Next day, fully reconciled, they left for the country.